Oh yeah, somebody did show me that.
It's really cool.
Is it?
It's like how to live but not in Burma. It's really cool. He
Yeah.
taught it to
What
a
good is
group.
it then?
He taught it to a group of college kids. Most of them were Buddha when they came to stay
Yeah.
in India.
They are, right? What is Steve doing here? Isn't it Super Bowl Sunday?
Oh, is this Super Bowl Sunday?
Stupid bowl.
Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah, that's a good.
Thanks for reminding me.
He gets up and leaves. With his coat on.
Lock the doors. Well, oh, thank you. Well, we have a little time if you're awake. If I'm awake.
So, how important is mantra? Because we didn't do it today.
Is which?
How important is doing the mantra? Because we didn't do it today.
Oh, yeah. Oh, doing the mantra is really important. Well, of course, but sometimes, you know, when you're learning something, then you don't necessarily do all the pieces. But within the context of doing the full practice, it's critical. Don't you think? Would you like to say more, Pat? What's it? Well, we skipped a number of things, as everybody knows. The mantra may not have been as obvious. Maybe it would be good to have a program for people who would like to learn the Chenrezig practice, that there's some kind of schedule or something that makes it easier to get the whole thing and to get into it than kind of fitting it into our usual Sunday when we do Chenrezig. It's a little bit tight, you know, if you already know it and you recite it, go through it and do the practice, it fits nice in the Sunday. But if not everybody knows it, which is almost always the case, then those people are pretty much left out because they can't you get half of it or something, it doesn't make any sense at all. And it's okay occasionally, which is what it's kind of been. It's kind of been a little bit here, a little bit there, which may not add up to a real sense that the thing fits together. Anyway. There's light behind you, so I can't really see your face.
That's okay.
Maybe that's intentional.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I just wanted to ask you if you could expand on the concept of hell that you said is so different from the Christian tradition, and that you maybe will touch it this afternoon.
Is there a specific question there? Is there?
No.
What's on your mind?
My ignorance is big. Then when you mention it, I was curious.
What do you think of it?
That the Christian hell is punishment, and it doesn't go with
punishment.
our...
Okay, there's a good... I see. Well, that's kind of our Judeo-Christian background, is that hell is punishment. And if we this is not a punishment in the sense that somebody, our Judeo-Christian sense of hell is that there's something intentional done to you, right? By virtue of you did this, so now there'll be this intentional thing. In the same way that we catch a criminal and put them in prison, it's like there's an intentional number of steps there. In this case, there's no intentional, like you could do something terrible and the culture you're in may do all sorts of things to you for having done that. But as for hell, it's in the Buddhist tradition, we're looking more at karma, or my preference would be to think of it more in terms of the truth of interdependence. Here we have a thing where if we just take one side of this thing and look at the other side, we can see something. Like if I spend my life helping other people and other people appreciate it, and we enjoy each other's company doing all of these things, and that then we all see it's the result of the way in which we carefully manage our relationships and the way that we work together and all, and so everybody's kind of happy. But if we turn that around and I spend my life trying to get whatever I can from anyone I can get something from, so I use everybody for my benefit, we all recognize that doesn't lead to happiness. At least it doesn't lead to happiness. That's the best case. and the worst case is that it leads to a terrible suffering, just by virtue of not being careful and doing things that easily cause other people suffering. And when other people suffer, then they bring more suffering to other people. So it's like a snowball. It just keeps going like that. And when we see that we were responsible maybe for that, then we also hurt from that. So the hurt kind of grows that way. So that's, we can view that through the lens of the truth of interconnectedness. Anything you do will bear some fruit somehow, somewhere. You say something, you do something, it doesn't really matter. Something will happen. And so the hells, especially in the Vajrayana teachings of Buddhism are rather, the descriptions are florid. They're really elaborate. And they're kind of artful in a certain way, in the same way that the Judeo-Christian hells and the things that people have written about them over time, they often are kind of elaborate and in a certain way kind of artful. And partly, I think, the issue is that we actually don't believe it. Like many people today who are even have studied Christianity and been part of those traditions, they might at some point say, I don't believe it. That's not in accordance with the teachings there, but I think it's more strong and more likely to be part of an individual's recognized experience when we see the way that outcomes are from our own hands. What we say and do brings a result, and the more we see that, the more we recognize the difference between doing one thing and getting another thing which I don't like, and doing this thing and getting something that I do like, and gradually I start to move my actions in another direction because the outcome looks better. There's no punishment there. When you're 10 years old and you ride your bicycle too fast down the hill and it crashes and you're in the hospital, there's no punishment, right? It's not about punishment. Yeah. You're more careful the next time.
Thank you.
I think the hell realms here we really talk about. Let me say what one really big difference is that I was talking to another teacher, a Tibetan Lama once, and we ended up talking about hells. And he pointed out a distinction that I'd never heard before. So this was like 20 years ago now. And he said, one of the big differences between the kind of the Western idea of hells and the Tibetan idea of hells is that in the Western idea of hell, if you committed certain crimes, especially crimes against the church or against your promises within the religious tradition, then there's kind of like, there's a place that's reserved for you. When you die, it's already determined. You're gonna go to this place, kind of like a hotel reservation. And in the deepest understanding of the hells, from the Buddhist perspective, I think we have to say there isn't any reservation. Like that hell occurs when you are born there. It's kind of at the same moment. And when you're gone, it's gone. In other words, it never really was there. But your experience is hellish when you're there. It's a terrible experience, but there isn't anything there. Which, I think a lot of people steeped in the tradition might say, even you had a terrible experience, that wasn't real either. But of course, that isn't helpful when you're having that experience. So I think that there is some fundamental differences. And what Westerners often relate to is the idea of, I say something nice, and it affects 2 or 3 people, or 20 or 30 people, and the result is lots of things happen around it. And if I say or do something that hurts somebody, the same thing happens in the other direction. But it's not a punishment. In fact, I'm remembering this one Lama also was saying, in the West, you can get away with doing really bad things. from the Tibetan perspective, you can't get away from it because you are it. So no matter where you go or how fast you run, you are the person who is experiencing these things and creating these circumstances. There's no way to get away from it. Whereas people even used to ask Kala Rinpoche, if they murdered people in this life, is it possible that they would get away with it? And he would always say, it's impossible to get away. You can't escape the karma of it. It's just there. But of course, then we come to this really strange thing, which is the proposition that the vast majority of karma that ripens in this life came from another period, not from this life. And that one is a fascinating thing to ponder, that the majority of the karma that ripens, and most of it is kind of mediocre, not particularly big or small, or good or bad, but most of it is from other lives. And it makes sense when you think that the period behind me that was there before this life is much bigger than this life in terms of its duration and all. It's like there isn't any contest. So yeah, most of the stuff comes from a previous life. Then if you hold that view and see your life through that lens, everything gets slightly smaller. Not so important. You don't have to find the person who's responsible for your being hurt, because you don't even know who that person could be or when they lived or what happened. You're kind of divorced from it. But there's a value in embracing all of those things as they occur, as if, and not as if, but it's said to be, because of being responsible for all the things that came to you. Does it make sense? Where am I?
No.
I can't place where the sound's coming from. Oh, okay. Oh.
Just a funny prelude to the question.
Is it on? Does it sound?
It is, yeah.
It's got a red light.
It's
It's got a
on.
red light.
It's on.
No,
It's
it
on,
sounds
but
like it's on.
It's wearing out.
It's wearing
Talk
out.
about we
Me too.
You can talk till they get a new battery.
Okay. So when you talk about
Battery.
the Judeo-Christian
Yeah.
concept of hell, having grown up Jewish, there was never any speaking of or teachings about hell. They have different ways of instilling guilt and fear.
Would you like to talk about that a bit?
Everybody gets it.
No, that would be too boring.
Oh, no. Let's have
No,
the
but
goods.
what I'd like to hear a little more about is earlier today when you were telling a story about Kala Rinpoche, and where he was saying that he meditated for years and years and decades in some very difficult situations, and there's no way that he is even close to gaining control over his mind.
Yeah.
When I hear things like that, there's a little bit, it disturbs me a little bit, because it sort of feels like, gee, I'm getting close to the edge here that falls into nihilism. And I have, perhaps distinguishing this from, because I've mentioned before, I've heard Khenpo Rinpoche talk about this, and there's
Now it's dead.
Oh,
Here, try that one.
Green light, red light, green light, 1, 2, 3. So there's the cultural tradition, like Kempo Rinpoche will give a talk and he'll say, of course, I'm just repeating what I've heard from others. I have no realization myself. And we understand that that's kind of this, it's this cultural thing where, that's the tradition about, people not taking personal credit, they're not bolstering their own ego. But when I hear this thing about, people that we look to as being highly accomplished, highly realized masters who then say things like, not even close to being able to control my mind. I mean, there's a reaction that I feel like, oh God, why am I even doing this? And yet, my experience is that, I see effects that practice has had on me over the years. And so there's kind of a confidence that starts to get built, but that kind of talk erodes the foundation of the confidence.
Well, I think there's two things there. One is it never was the case, as I understand it, that we meditate in order to control the mind. That's not number one. It's not about the control of the mind. It's about something else. So the mind is an endless stream of appearances, feelings, and all that run continuously. So if we begin to talk about control, we might find ourselves talking about how do we control that stream of experience, when it seems that the real issue that we could have some influence on is our relationship with that flow.
But we do hear teachings where, even if I'm recalling correctly, where some teachings from the Buddha that even talks about taming the mind.
Yeah. But what does that mean? We have the same issue there, the same question, and that is that let's take the 7-point mind training, for example. It's a good example, I think. When we engage in the 7-point mind training, something happens over a short or long period, depending on the person, where the way that the mind kind of flows on its own changes. Its direction may even change if it's a large enough change for the individual. So I think that we got to put aside the thing about control, because even Kala Rinpoche was joking about that when he said it in the example that I'm using. I mean, he was basically saying he worked really hard and found that even he could not control the mind. Well, the person who had raised the question was saying that others were controlling his mind. And so his joke was, I've spent decades meditating in the mountains and I can't control my mind. So what chance is there that someone else is going to be able to control it? That was the joke about it. He didn't clarify, I don't really mean that I can't control it, I can't do this or that. But actually, I've come away a number of times feeling like it actually has absolutely nothing to do with controlling the mind. It might be a little bit around controlling the kleshas, doing something about that, but the mind stream itself is more like, it's really the thing that moves according to the interconnectedness of things.
Okay, so I understand that I misconstrued the comment by taking it out of context.
So that was my intention.
Thank you.
It worked.
But it is about
being aware of the mind stream, not so much controlling it, but being aware of it is important, no?
Sort of. I'm not sure, but what even that maybe is a little bit iffy. I mean, it would seem to be that most of the advice that we get is how do you find a way to be happy in a world of suffering? So if controlling is the way that you get there, then we'd be talking about controlling. But how often do you hear that? I've only heard it once, controlling the mind. So I think that and we talk about the mind from the perspective of the Dharmakaya as being kind of the ultimate body that we refer to as mind itself. And its unlimited flow of appearances and sensations and feelings and everything flows from that. There is no controlling it, but one could change one's relationship to it, and hopefully would change one's relationship to it by virtue of practice and other things. And at some point, then maybe you see that flow accurately as it actually is, but that's the end of what I can say, because I don't have that level of realization. So I don't know what that looks like, but I can imagine what it looks like. It looks like maybe better practice some more. Before the flood comes. Iffy stuff. Oh, shit. What?
So what makes me feel kind of blue, hopeless, is the idea that karma is inescapable for everyone.
It's what?
Inescapable. Because we don't know what we're doing, but what we're doing is creating suffering that just snowballs. And that feels really desperate. That's what we do, is create suffering without even knowing it. And we have to we own, the karma associated with the suffering that we create. So my question is, and I guess it's kind of like a hope, is about purification practices, and specifically Chenrezig. We imagined in Chenrezig today that beings in all the realms, were immediately free from suffering and its causes, like on the spot, free from that. And I'm wondering, how does that reconciled with the teaching that karma is inescapable, and that you will indeed walk through all of the consequences of your own actions, intended or unintended, in the future lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, and in between.
And in between, you said?
In the bardos, so much suffering and difficulty, and yeah.
Well, this is why this morning I wrote that little piece, because I understand what you're saying, and I actually share that concern. Not because I think that the teaching on it is not right, but because it's hard for us to get into the place where it actually even makes sense. So that's my real feeling about it, is that it does not make sense unless you can embrace the view of unbounded interconnectedness. If that's there, then there's, and I think that does make sense to me. But of course, we often interpret things through our own history and through our own feeling today of what something is, when in fact, when we're talking about karma, we're talking about causes and conditions that existed perhaps centuries ago. So how much do you make out of that? If you hang yourself with it, that's a real problem, but it's also a misunderstanding of the teaching. So if we look at two things, I think it clarifies a number of things. One is the teaching is not meant to be a punishment. So right there, if we're able to, we can kind of hold a mirror up and reflect what we see, that it doesn't look to me like things are so bad. In other words, if I say something kind to you, I would normally expect, most of us would expect, that there would be some kindness coming back. But the teachings on the karma are really like, well, probably, but not necessarily, because it's not all kind of lined up like some wall of karma moving along in some easy way, where if you're keeping tabs of what you and other people have done, that it would somehow all add up and balance at the bottom. It's not like that, clearly. And so, having done something that is in everybody's eyes kind doesn't mean that you're going to be rewarded for that. And I think that teaching is helpful, not by virtue of leading us into a place of feeling miserable, but rather by giving us the opportunity for a larger view of things. And I would also say that if that doesn't work, then abandon that particular teaching, because it's not meant to make us feel miserable. That's definitely the case. I've never heard, well, it's meant to make you feel miserable because sooner or later you'll figure it out. I've never heard of anything like that. So come along. I feel like it does. It is helpful. Personally, I find it helpful to hold the view of unbounded interconnectedness. Not that I understand it, but it makes sense to me. It's kind of like you got a paper bag, don't throw it in the lake, throw it in the trash. Actually, either way, I don't experience anything from it. But with some understanding, I'm more inclined to put it in the trash. And I think in the same way, if we can understand it, we have a sense that makes those things feel like they're a growth process. How are we doing, Judith? Should we go get a beer?
Yes, I can go have a beer.
I think that I still have a bit of a query. So you said, and I get, we see things through our history and through the way that we see. And so I'm looking at the way that I see. And so I'm thinking about this question that I have. My mother died recently.
Yes.
And I was thinking, as she was going through that process, that, my mother as a human being who grew up, in a Catholic tradition, she was a human being. She made errors in her life and unintended sorts of things. She suffered in her life. And I had the idea that at the end of her life, she was absolutely 100% ultimately free of all of that. And just, just this open kind of you know, manifestation or that. And so I guess that might be a part of my query, you know. Is there a way in which that someone can, for example, we can also go to Milarepa, who did some really terrible things. Did he, because of all the work that he did in his life after that, did he experience or need to experience the effects of the terrible things that he did, or is there a possibility for purification in a lifetime that opens one beyond that wheel?
That's definitely, that's classic teaching, always the opportunity to purify. Even having done terrible things, like he murdered quite a few people, and still it's said that, you know, it turned out pretty good. But I find myself, even in that case, being skeptical. How good could it turn out? And especially since we know his biography was written a couple hundred years after he died, it's like, you know, wonder like, well, I don't know who said this and that. But I'm just too much of a skeptic generally. I have the same feeling around quotes from the Buddha. Like, I don't know that guy. When did he say that? And yet, I think, so we all have a personal relationship with these things. There's no getting away from it, and I wouldn't even suggest getting away from it. Because what we're trying to find is a consistency and an intensity which feels like it's on the side of goodness, whatever the goodness is. If it's healing me from feeling bad about something I've done, then I'm happy about it. And if I'm feeling like I'm getting drawn into some darkness, then I'm not happy about it. And it doesn't require that the Buddha said this or Milarepa said or did that other thing. I feel like a lot of these things are the way the culture takes care of itself. You know, we write things, we share things, we practice things, and to a certain degree, it's just how we take care of ourselves. So I do think that in the process of all of these meanderings that we're doing right now and that we have done previously, we are trying to construct an environment internally and externally for ourselves and to some degree for others that will lead to some kind of I want to say mental health, but actually that's too small. What I really would prefer to say is that it leads us in the direction of recognizing the nature of mind itself. And I don't know why I don't just settle for mental health, because I know the difference between mental health and not mental health in my own being, and I have no idea what it's like to recognize the nature of mind, but I prefer the nature of mind over mental health even. And why is that? Because that's the result of a number of views that I've carried, that I've been encouraged to carry, and so I carry them, I still carry them. I still feel like the goal is recognize the nature of mind. As close as you can get to it, as many of the things you can do to encourage that, that's where I want to be. And I would not tell somebody else that that's really where they need to be, because they may already be there for one thing, or they may have other things that need to be done before they can even begin to practice in that direction. I have no idea. But I do feel like all the things that we do in the context of this tradition are meant to bring a sense of sanity and goodness, just in the most broadest way, to each person. And it doesn't always work, because we do not come as blank slates. We all bring whatever we have with us, and that always gets mixed in. It's kind of like, I know, in Asia, when I would go and shop for cooking that night, I always knew that it was probably not going to turn out the way I was used to it tasting. There was going to be something in there that I'd never tasted before, like a big centipede that I accidentally boiled into the soup. That's what, that's true. That actually happened. So it's like, of course, after making the soup and I saw the centipede, I threw the soup out, and I will never forget that soup. Which is totally weird because, of course, I didn't taste it. I was horrified by it. Partly horrified by the thing dying in the soup and all. It's not so simple as everything is kind of painted together sometimes, and the teaching sometimes is very kind of choreographed, what we should do and can do and shouldn't do and all that. And then comes real life where we sit down and try and figure out what to do next. And the teachings do not answer every question that we have and don't solve every problem, or we wouldn't be sitting here today. It is indeed kind of a mix of things that we gradually learn how to put them all together.
Michael, I want a little bit of guidance from you. You started out this morning session by saying that we should remember the view, and the view, right? And the view being that the practice is supposed to bring out or touch upon or show to you the nature of your mind. So, as I thought about what you said, I said to myself, well, if I go through the practice, right, I mean, at least there is that one page, okay, where it clearly states, okay, that's after the dissolution. And I want to just get to that.
After the dissolution? Yeah.
It's the
famous
yes,
page.
that's right. That's right. So it says over here, nature of your mind, right? I mean, so you said nature of your mind. You said, thoughts and memory are waves of great intrinsic awareness.
I couldn't understand what you said. Will you say it again?
Well, I mean, I'm reading the text from page 33, and I'm saying to myself, I mean, I asked the larger question as we were going through the practice, at least for myself, where does it speak to me? Where does the word nature of mind, okay, or the sense of it, the spirit of it, where in this practice does it speak to me? Now, certainly there are many vectors in the practice, right? You started out with devotion, and then we went through so many parts of the practice. And they speak to, I'm sure, to everybody in different ways. But for me, I kept asking myself, well, okay, I understand devotion, the part of devotion, and I like that aspect of the practice. But where does the nature of mind come out? Now, I think that one place where I felt is, so when I read this particular sentence, right, thought and memory are waves of great intrinsic awareness, that speaks to me. Okay, that tells me a little bit about how I experience thoughts in shamatha, and that tells me a little bit about what the nature of mind is, at least from when you do shamatha, how you experience it. So this sentence relates to what you said. Then the other place for me was where out of his compassion he blesses the realms. The light goes out from to each realm, right?
Yeah.
And there's that sense of, or that feeling that comes, that sense of his compassion,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So that speaks to me a little bit, okay, about, I mean, it's there. There's something good in us that it speaks to the nature of mind, and so the practice showed it. So my question is, what are the other ways that I should be looking at this practice that will speak to the nature of mind?
Yeah. You want the long list or the short one?
I'll take the short one.
Well, I got you to smile. That's pretty good. Anything else? I come back to the very beginning of this morning when we were talking about first the business of we kind of build our own world and live in it. And then somewhat humorously, we rarely take personal responsibility for it. And I know that some people would say, no, I take full responsibility for it. But it's not my experience. That comes a little later, taking responsibility for it. And we do some elaborate things in trying to build a world for ourselves, in the kinds of houses that we build, in the kinds of relationships that we have, in the ways that we express ourselves in writing and talking, and projects that we line up and do together or separate or whatever. We engage in some things that maybe half the people will say, that's pretty strange, and the other half will want to do it and feel bad because they can't participate. I mean, it's just, we are the architects of our environments in terms of our experience of those environments. It doesn't mean that we all build our own houses or that we build our own cars or whatever, but we set all of the things in place for the experiences that we have with every situation that we encounter. And it doesn't mean that we're at fault. It doesn't mean that somebody else is at fault. It just means that's what we do. And I think when we look at the practice here, we're really practicing the same thing. It wouldn't make any sense if we took this and did something with it radically different from what we do with our lives normally. It's like this has to be like mixed into the pot, or I can't understand why one would even use it. And what I see is that I do make my own environment, internal and external, in all ways. I am the primary architect of it. So I won't say that it's total because I meet Suvanch, and Suvanch and I spend some time together and we talk and we do something, and then something happens to all the things that I've been putting together, and maybe they look better and maybe they don't look as good. And so it's not like I am individually all powerful to control all of those forces, even if I wanted to. I don't know why Chenrezig looks more complicated in terms of building and affecting our own experience in the world. I don't know why Chenrezig looks more complicated than what we do anyway. Because what we do anyway is enormously complicated, and it appears to flow onward without, in most cases, any intention even. So in a certain way, even though I think that for someone who's never encountered something like Chenrezig or doesn't relate to it much, it doesn't look like something that's interesting or worthwhile even. But when I look at what we just do naturally all the time, and it is so much more complicated than the most complicated Dharma practice that I've ever seen, and I've seen complicated ones. So I think that the issue here is like it always is, the same thing. The more we practice, the more we see the things that we do, amongst other things, that affect our lives and affect the lives of others. And that becomes the grist. You know, when we want to make a change, we have to embrace what we've already done and all the things that are flowing out of the circumstances that we've already put in place. And we often are surprised by the number of things that confront us when we try to step out of a situation that feels like it's too troublesome, just to give an example. So I'm not sure if that addresses your question. You can throw something at me if you want. It's okay.
I have to think about it.
I'll take that as a no, it doesn't.
No. It's not that. I mean, you know, you brought this up a couple of times in the past also.
Yeah.
And I go to the practice, one, because it's something that our tradition says it should be done and done regularly. The other reason why I go for it is,
Is what?
The other reason is, it is a very nice devotional piece.
Oh yeah, right.
Okay.
Well, maybe. So you're saying that. So I could take that as, well, that's good. But I wouldn't say necessarily that it's a devotional piece, even though we all understand that that's a key part of the practice. But in the very beginning, I heard that devotion was a big deal, but it was kind of like a cool wind blowing by. It didn't affect me at all, because there were so many things that felt foreign in the practice that devotion or stability and contemplation, like, what is that? I had no idea what that was. Stability? What stability? So I wasn't sure whether my mind was unstable, my practice was unstable, or whether meditation itself was inherently unstable. Nothing made much sense for about 10 years. So I think it's easy to get into that place, and I still find myself in those places from time to time, where I just feel like I actually have no idea what's going on. So then you try to do the thing that has worked in the past. And if you've gotten past the thing of using others for your own benefit, for example, that sort of thing, that's good. You'll probably end up doing something that is helpful. But many people, when they get derailed from their practice, go back to their worst habits because it's a sense of stable platform of some kind. I think from a kind position, both to ourselves and to others, it's helpful to try and recall the things that were really helpful, like kindness to someone who maybe hurt you, and taking responsibility for the various things that we say to ourselves and others, about situations that maybe we could have done a better job of something. I think doing those things is helpful. And we wander out of the practice regularly into the kind of the battlefield of our experiences.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure when I think of somebody like Milarepa, about which I claim to have no experience whatsoever, but deeply enjoyed the biographies. But I never feel like what I get from that can be shared somehow. I think it's really nice if we can find the marker in our practice that sings to us, like Chenrezig and devotion, for example. I mean, 10 years, I did the practice every day for 10 years. Devotion never, I wasn't drawn to it, so I just put it aside. And then when it comes around and you realize, whoa, that's kind of like, that's why my car doesn't go, because it's only got 3 wheels. And so then you start thinking at some point, well, people are saying your car should go, so you need to buy a wheel. That's kind of what it felt like at some point. Like you're not getting this because you don't have the devotion. And I felt like I shouldn't have to have devotion to get something. But what we're working with is actually what we want to have. We want to have devotion. We want to have kindness. We want to have equanimity. We want to have those 4 emotional, immeasurable states. We want to have the goods. But in order to get the goods, we have to take the tools and the material we have and build that thing. And then I think one could say, no one can take it away from you. Which is in a way another test. If someone can take it away from you, then it wasn't what you might have thought it was. Or you hadn't put it together quite right or something like that. And who doesn't have that experience? And one of the things I liked about the Milarepa stories was he allowed someone to kill him. You know, he allowed one of the kind of bad lamas who was jealous of Milarepa. Well, Milarepa inspired an enormous amount of jealousy amongst people who wanted to have his powers, or they felt like they should have those powers, or people should respect them as much as they respect Milarepa. It's like jealousy seemed to be a huge cloud that sort of followed Milarepa around by virtue of all these people who wanted to have his power. And if not his power, at least his very close alliance in some way. And Milarepa pretty much shunned it all. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want to be this, didn't want to be that. He didn't need any of those things. And so the people who thought they'd be able to get something from couldn't. And finally, one of them decided they were going to kill Milarepa. And Milarepa, it's a somewhat long and interesting story, but he basically thought, it's about time. I'm going to die anyway. So he pretty much let it happen. That's an interesting story. You know someone is going to assassinate you, and you even know exactly how it's going to happen, and then you let them do it. Because there's some other thing that you can leave behind that will be more valuable than if you were alive. Huh?
That's the Jesus story.
Kind of, yeah, except I don't think it's unique. it's a Well, are we okay?
Yes, thank you.
Or, well, mm-hmm. Peter.
You talked a lot about emptiness this morning too.
The which?
About emptiness
Yeah.
and how it's inherent. It's well, not inherent, but it's everywhere in each moment.
Yeah.
And there's that one on page 31 where it says appearance, sound, and awareness are mixed with emptiness, or the same as emptiness. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Appearance, sound, and awareness, inseparable with emptiness.
And I'm wondering if you're talking about just that it's impermanent, or is there something? Are there different kinds of emptiness here we're talking about, or is it?
I think the first cut for understanding emptiness is to understand interdependence. That's the first cut. That's my sense of it. Is you'll never get emptiness if you don't get interdependence. And not just a lot of interdependence, but pretty much the sense of there is no such thing as something that is not interdependent with all other things. It's just like that is so important to get that. Interdependence. So here we have appearance, sound, and awareness are inseparable with emptiness. This is because we say that everything is inseparable with emptiness. There isn't anything else. But I can recall hearing that. The first time I heard that, I thought, I really did think that either the person who was saying it didn't really know what they were talking about. I mean, I had plenty of arrogance, so that wasn't a problem. Or they weren't telling the whole story. Something missing in all of that. Why did they say everything is co-present with emptiness? Why wouldn't I say that if it was so clear? And I just couldn't do it. But I think that one of the things is interdependence is a great contemplation for getting at the emptiness, because we can see with our own eyes and our own taste and everything, our senses, that everything that we are aware of, including the content of our own mind or our own brain, however you want to look at it, those internal experiences are also interdependent. Today, maybe somebody offended me, and so I didn't like them. And then I thought to myself, ooh, you're poisoning yourself here. And then I do something, and then I like them. And then I did something else, and other things changed, so I can see things are kind of moving. Well, the result of that is also a little bit of insight into these things are not actually real. I mean, if I can just change my attitude slightly on a day when it's easy and things change, it's like well, that sort of says there's nothing there. And that's the story of emptiness, is what you think is there is not there. There's no there. It's just not there. And the Dorji Changtuma prayer is like so poignant on that. If you take that prayer and read it and ponder it, the pieces of it, I think it becomes it gives a compelling case, which can almost be, this is my experience, it can almost be thoroughly grasped conceptually, but not quite. You can fool yourself into thinking the conceptual understanding is it, because there is that's it, conceptual understanding. It's not the experience, which is what we actually want. We want the experience of emptiness, not the conceptual understanding of it. Conceptual understanding is interesting, fascinating, maybe, but it doesn't turn things over. The experience does that. And the experience is everything. I mean, that seems to me to be true of the Dharma in its entirety. Everything that we do leads to experiences, and the experiences and what we do with those experiences is the path. There isn't some other thing to be had. It's what you do there. So the emptiness we see in the interdependence, you can look at it at a macro level, it's kind of the grand interdependence. You can look at it at a really small level. But for me, and again, I'm speaking my own personal experiences, the interdependence which is inspiring is the interdependence I witness in myself. I plant this seed, something happens, I say, oh, what about this? I do something, something changes, it's continually moving, and the appearances also change a lot.
It sort of seems like there's a mystical experience of emptiness.
A visceral experience?
Mystical kind of experience of emptiness.
A mystical experience.
And then there's also this, so something changes, that doesn't make it empty to me, that just means it changed. Or there was a change happening, it wasn't fixed. So there's the emptiness that means things aren't fixed, or there's no inherent existence, which doesn't mean to me the same thing as what that phrase points to in the text. To me, it points to more of a mystical experience than that kind of emptiness. It's sort of different, and I'm not sure you kind of were touching on that, not the conceptual part versus the experiential part to me. But well,
I think it's personal. That's why. I think it's personal. I mean, it's of some recent change in my own mind that I even use the word mystical, which for at least 20 years felt like, don't use that word. That word is loaded, and you never know when it's going to go off. Right. Kind of really like that. And recently it felt to me like we were getting to the place of needing to have a word for something that we weren't kind of acknowledging somehow. And the word mystical seemed like it fit in a place where we had an experience which was not dependent, ideally, in any way at all by the intellect, which is a statement made by Tongtong Gyalpo in one of his things, in what he, I'm not sure he coined the phrase, but the 4 faults of Mahamudra. If you're interested in this, you can go and read that, and his comments on, Tongtong Gyalpo's comments on the 4 faults of Mahamudra, where after making it's a very short and profound teaching that's worthwhile looking at, I would say every month anyway, because you never know when you have the aha. But I think that the aha comes in an utterly non-conceptual way. And Tongtong Gyalpo says, do not ever make the mistake of thinking that you can understand this with the intellect. So that then, with some exploration of that, I thought, maybe it's that place that deserves the moniker of mystical. You cannot access it with the intellect. Which isn't to say that the intellect isn't useful. It's just that we sometimes, because we're so conceptual oriented, that we think we've made the discovery and we put the whole thing aside, and then we don't have access to it in any way. Anyway, now I like the term. So as much as I hated it before, now I think it has a place, and that place can be described in a meaningful way, which previously it felt like very loose jargon. Well,
I still have a suspicion about mystical, probably on my Catholic upbringing. But I'm very curious about what was going on when great saints of any tradition would go into a swoon of ecstasy, were they having a mystical experience? Had the world as they knew it broken up into a million tiny lights and then those disappeared into ultimate emptiness? What was going on there? Got any ideas?
No, but I have a kind of cynical idea.
That's not what I'm looking for.
Well, I think there's a slot, a useful slot for the word mystical. That's a change in my own sense of things. But I also think that one can have experiences that feel like they're utterly non-conceptual or intellectual, but they're not particularly useful also.
Well, is a mystical experience, quote unquote, useful?
Well, in the context of spiritual progression in some sense, yeah, it might very well be, sure. It definitely is, according to Tongtong Gyalpo, if you like him.
I do.
Yeah, me too.
Well, so do you think there's any ecstasy or swoon involved in a mystical experience?
You know, I don't really know. I know what it feels like to look at something that was considered conceptually only, and then to see that there's a piece of it that you cannot get at in that way. You actually have to bring your awareness and really plant it on this other thing, which is not a thing, which cannot be identified. And something then can happen. But I don't, you know, it's like I don't feel qualified to say more than that about it.
Okay.
I mean, maybe people take drugs and get it, I don't know.
Possibly. I wouldn't preclude that necessarily. You say placing one's awareness on experience as if awareness is a thing. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, remove the word thing and just call it awareness. How does that feel?
It seems rather focused, as if it has a defined meaning to me. Awareness seems to have a focused meaning. And I'm not sure that awareness is necessarily focused, but could be diffused and something other than focused.
I don't know. I know that we have the instruction often to place the mind on an object and to place the mind on an experience.
The mind meaning awareness or something else?
I think we're talking about ordinary awareness to begin with.
Ordinary mind?
Yeah. It could be ordinary mind, but that's a little bit exalted. Maybe not. Might just be you have an awareness, you have a feeling. Maybe you have a feeling about the nature of mysticism and the experience that you're having, not the idea that you're having, but the experience you're having, then is where you would place your awareness. It's kind of like balancing one marble on top of another one.
Would you say it's something like simply looking at the experience? Would that be another way of saying
Well, I think you're playing trick language here.
I'm trying not to, is exactly what I'm trying not to do.
I know you're not, but I think that's what it is.
Okay.
Because just changing the language can give you a different feel, but it doesn't necessarily give you what it is you're looking for. So if we're looking for engaging in some kind of a practice or an experience, which in and of itself is in no way dependent upon the intellect, which is one of the signs.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't need to be able to name it or anything, and it remains the same. Then that's right on the edge of Tongtong Gyalpo's thing of do not bring the intellect here. It can't come in. It
Mm-hmm. Okay.
won't work. And And I think that experience is fairly easy to convince oneself of by having an experience which feels like it doesn't depend on the intellect, and then bringing the intellect to bear on it, and oftentimes it just destroys the experience itself. The experience itself in those practices often are meant to be put onto a strong experience, a very strong experience, like a really hot klesha of some kind. The hotter the better, depending upon your ability to work with it, and you just rest the awareness there on that place.
Kleshas being a place of no intellect?
Well, place, we use, you have to step back from the language a little bit, because just to say, don't bring the intellect to it is like you've already brought the intellect to it. So you have to acknowledge that if you can't get in there with the intellect, then the question is, how do you get in there without the intellect? Because I find myself naming it and talking about it, saying something, well, maybe this, maybe that. And those are the very things that then you end realizing that I can't do that. But that's also partly just the natural result of very difficult, very esoteric practices that are not easy to penetrate. So we try to bring all the tools to bear that we can find, that we know about, that we know how to use, and oftentimes one of those tools is what undermines the insight. And that's why people practice for years and go and do strange things in strange places in order to see if they can see what they couldn't see before. I think that is true.
Like chew in the graveyard?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
So one thing here which I wanted to bring this morning and I forgot to bring it. As people make an effort to practice Chenrezig, there's this book and there's a couple of others. Bill, do you know any alternatives to that? The Lord of Love book, but how do we get it? Yeah. That's the one that's not in print, though, right?
But we have the. It's on a Kindle. We have an excerpt from it. Yeah, we have the reworked version that Kemper and Shea had Eric do.
Oh, we have that, and that's like in print or electronic.
Yeah, I think we have that. It's the excerpt from Lord of Love. Yes, we have it. Yeah.
The excerpt.
Yeah.
It's condensed.
Yeah, it's
improved and condensed.
And the franglais has been translated into English.
Oh yeah, those read.
Yeah.
These are all commentaries on Chenrezig practice
Yeah.
we're talking about. So this one's Ringo Toku, who was
Yeah.
here. It's also quite good. They're in the bookstore.
Nice.
Yeah, we've had that for a while. $5.
Yeah. What's that?
You refer to a text, or you refer to something written by
I'm trying to remember. I can't remember what particular place that came from now. The Tongtong Gyalpo's quote about the four faults of Mahamudra.
It's the Charchingyalma commentaries.
The which?
The Charchingyalma.
Oh yeah.
See Bill, if you're interested.
Yeah.
See Bill at break.
Yeah.
He'll show you.
You can get it online, folks. Look, he's got it online.
I just did.
Oh, you did, and you didn't get anything?
And not at Amazon.com.
Well,
No,
go
he'll
look
show
over
you.
Bill's shoulder
He's got it
and
right
see what he's doing. He's in it.
Yes, you
What?
have to do that.
No, this is.
You have to do that.
The one who also did the iron bridges?
Yeah.
That guy.
Yeah, that guy.
Iron Bridge.
Yeah.
Patron saint of civil engineers.
That's good.
No, his bridges were literally, it's documented. There's a paper trail of some missionaries who went through Tibet, drew pictures of the bridges that he built, and those bridges actually became the source for people trying out little suspension bridges that they built as garden follies at first, and then much later on actually built as functional suspension bridges. So he's actually the origin of European suspension bridges.
Amazing.
Bill, aren't there still some of those bridges in
There might still be a few of those bridges intact. Yeah, Bhutan, I think, and they were used actively up until the last century as primary bridges across before wheel traffic became and roads were put in. The metallurgy is actually remarkable too. If you think about iron and hundreds of years out in the weather, rust. The metallurgy is such, it's actually more like a kind of steel that has, and I think it's some addition of arsenic, actually, not because it was a poison, but just because it actually had the chemical effect that's similar to Corten steel, modern Corten steel, where you'll get some oxide on the outside, but it won't actually, once that goes, then it's kind of bulletproof.
What century was she building them?
Oh Lord,
Just
I don't know,
Is it in Cyrus?
1200s. No, it's I think it's Cyrus Stearns did King of the Empty Plain, didn't he? Yeah.
That's a big deal.
way.
Yeah, it's better than the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm not kidding.
It's really a good book to read.
Break.
Break. What are you gonna break?
Looks like we're having a break.